The moment Admiral Kira Valdez stepped onto the bridge of the Harbinger's Dawn, she knew she was staring at humanity's last gamble. Wrapped in 30 kilometers of bleeding-edge technology and desperation, the flagship hung in the void beyond Neptune's orbit, its hull bristling with weapons that had never been tested in actual combat, powered by a reactor core that physicists claimed could either save the human race or accidentally collapse the solar system. "Status report," Valdez commanded, her voice cutting through the bridge's tension like a monofilament blade. Commander Dex Korath, his name a bitter reminder of the Corvani Empire's gifts to humanity before the betrayal turned from his station. Half his face bore the scars of the Titan Station massacre, when their former allies had revealed their true nature. "All systems nominal, Admiral. The Void engine is stable at 40% capacity. Weapon systems are armed and ready. Through the viewport, Earth looked deceptively peaceful." But Valdez knew that beneath those blue oceans and white clouds, 3 billion humans huddled in underground cities, waiting to learn if they would see another sunrise. The Corvani Armada had given humanity 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. 68 hours had already passed. "Incoming transmission from Corvani High Command," reported Lieutenant Nia Thorne from Communications. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the grotesque form of War Hegemon Vextar Colthane. The aliens for arms gesticulated with theatrical menace, while his compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. Behind him loomed the massive silhouette of the Corvani Dreadnought World Render, flagship of an armada that had already consumed 17 civilizations. "Humans," Vextar S. translator rendered his clicking speech into mockingly polite English. "Your pathetic vessel cannot hope to challenge the might of the Corvani Empire. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Continue this charade, and we will make your extinction a work of art that echoes across the galaxy for millennia." Valdez stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but her heart still hammered against her ribs. "War Hegemon Vextar, I am Admiral Kira Valdez of the Terran Defense Fleet. I'm calling to discuss the terms of your surrender." The alien's compound eyes seemed to widen in what might have been amusement. "Amusing. The prey species believes it can negotiate with apex predators. No negotiation." Valdez replied coolly, "You have 1 hour to withdraw from Sol System, or we will demonstrate why humanity earned the right to exist in this galaxy through 10,000 years of warfare against our own world." Vextar's laughter was like grinding glass. "One ship against my armada of 10,000 vessels. Even humans cannot be this delusional." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the humming of the Void engine, that marvel of human engineering that had consumed the resources of 12 entire planets to construct. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's chief architect, had called it weaponized space-time. Others had less charitable descriptions. "All hands, this is Admiral Valdez," she announced over the ship's communication system. "In 57 minutes, we will engage the Corvani Armada. We are outnumbered 10,000 to 1. Our enemy possesses technology that can crack planets like eggs. They have conquered civilizations that existed when Earth was still cooling from primordial fire." She paused, watching her crew, humans, augmented humans, and the few alien refugees who had chosen to stand with humanity rather than bow to Corvani dominance. But they have never faced humanity at war. They know nothing of Stalingrad or Thermopylae or the siege of Terra Nova. They do not understand what drives a species that clawed its way to the stars, despite every cosmic force trying to crush it. Today, we teach them. The Harbinger's Dawn began to accelerate toward the Corvani formation, its void engine building to combat levels. In the distance, the alien armada waited like a cloud of metallic death, confident in their numerical superiority. What? They couldn't see what their sensors couldn't detect. Was that humanity's flagship wasn't just a warship? It was a weapon system designed by a species that had learned the hardest lesson in the universe. When extinction comes calling, you don't fight fair. You fight to win. The first exchange of fire began when humanity was still 4,000,000 kilometers from the Corvani line. "Incoming projectiles," Commander Korath announced, his scarred face illuminated by tactical displays. "Gravitic torpedoes, approximately 12,000 inbound. Impact in 47 seconds." Admiral Valdez watched the swarm of death racing toward her ship, each torpedo capable of generating a localized gravity well strong enough to crush a mountain. The Corvani had opened with their standard intimidation tactic, overwhelming firepower. designed to break an enemy's will before the real battle began. Defensive systems online. She ordered calmly, activate the distortion field. The Harbinger's dawn shimmered as exotic matter projectors created a bubble of twisted space-time. Around the vessel, the first wave of torpedoes struck the field and simply ceased. Not destroyed, not deflected, they slipped sideways through dimensions that human science barely understood, emerging harmlessly in empty space thousands of kilometers away. On the Corvani flagship's bridge, Warhead Jim and Vextar felt the first stirring of unease. His targeting systems showed direct hits, but the human vessel continued its approach unharmed. Interesting. He clicked to his weapons coordinator. Fire the plasma batteries. Full intensity. Coherent streams of starfire lanced across the void, each beam carrying enough energy to boil away a small moon's atmosphere. They struck the Harbinger's dawn and scattered like water hitting diamond, redirected by gravitational lenses that shouldn't have been possible to construct, let alone deploy. On a mobile platform, return fire, Valdres commanded. Give them a taste of human hospitality. The flagship's main guns were unlike anything previously seen in galactic warfare. Instead of projectiles or energy beams, they fired concentrated packets of quantum uncertainty regions of space where the fundamental constants of physics became negotiable suggestions. The first volley struck 3 Corvani destroyers in the vanguard. For a microsecond, nothing seemed to happen. Then the alien vessels began to unfold. Their hulls twisted into impossible geometric shapes as local space forgot how to maintain structural integrity. The ships didn't explode, they simply stopped being ships and became abstract mathematical concepts spread across several cubic kilometers. Vextar's compound eyes bulged as he processed what he was witnessing. Into centuries of conquest, he had never seen weapons that attacked reality itself. Full fleet engagement. He roared, concentrate all fire on that abomination. The Corvani armada responded like a living thing, 10,000 warships adjusting their formation to focus their combined firepower on the human flagship. The space between the fleets lit up with energy discharges, missile trails, and exotic weapon effects that turned the void into a kaleidoscope of destruction. The Harbinger's dawn weathered the storm, its distortion field flickering and sparking under the incredible assault. Warning lights bathed the bridge in crimson as systems strained beyond their design parameters. Field generators at 85% capacity and climbing. Dr. Vasquez reported from her engineering station. We can't maintain this level of defense indefinitely, that we don't maintain it. Valdres replied. All stop, rotate to present broadside, prepare the cascade cannons. Commander Korath looked up in alarm. Admiral, the cascade system is still experimental. We've never tested it against living targets. Then consider this a field test. Valdres said grimly, fire when ready. The Harbinger's dawn unleashed humanity's most terrible innovation weapons. That didn't just destroy matter, but caused it to forget how to exist in the first place. The cascade effect ripped through the Corvani formation like a virus of non-existence, each detonation spawning secondary reactions that erased dozens of additional ships from reality. In 30 seconds, humanity reduced the Corvani armada from 10,000 vessels to fewer than 8,000. But the aliens adapted quickly. Their remaining ships began deploying reality anchors devices that stabilized local spacetime and made it resistant to humanity's exotic weapons. The cascade effect flickered and died as the Corvani established defensive zones where normal physics reasserted dominance. Clever, Valdres admitted. They learned fast. The alien fleet reformed into a spherical formation around the human flagship, keeping just outside the range of the distortion field while maintaining constant fire. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles hammered against humanity's defenses in a steady rhythm designed to eventually overwhelm even exotic shielding. We're trapped, Korath observed. They're using classic siege tactics contained in a trit. Valdres smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. They think we're trapped. Let me show them the difference between human tactics and human strategy. She opened a channel to engineering. Dr. Vasquez, begin the resonance cascade sequence. Authorization Omega 77. Admiral, Vasquez's voice carried a note of alarm. If we initiate resonance cascade at this range, the backwash could what? Doctor? A pause. Could tear a hole in space-time large enough to swallow half the solar system. Exactly. Do it. The Harbinger's dawn began to change. Its hull plating retracted to reveal massive crystalline structures that hummed with barely contained energy. The void engine's output spiked to levels that should have been impossible. drawing power from the quantum foam itself. In the Corvani formation, sensor operators began reporting impossible readings. The human ship wasn't just charging weapons, it was preparing to wound the universe itself. Warhead Gem and Vexstar finally understood what he was facing. Humanity hadn't built a warship. They had built a doomsday device with engines. The quantum resonance building within the Harbinger's Dawn created ripples that registered on every sensor array. Within a light-hour radius, space itself began to warp around the flagship as the Void engine drew power from dimensions that existed in the gaps between reality. Warhead Gem and Vexstar watched his tactical displays with growing horror as the human vessel transformed from warship to cosmic aberration. The crystalline structures along its hull pulsed with energy patterns that hurt to observe directly, while space-time around the vessel began to exhibit properties that his scientists insisted were theoretically impossible. Analysis complete. Warhead Gem, his chief technician, reported, voice quavering. The humans are preparing to detonate a quantum cascade device. Estimated yield. The technician's compound eyes dilated. Estimated yield approaches stellar-level energies, but contained within a localized space-time bubble. Meaning they intend to create a miniature universe and then collapse it violently. The resulting explosion will propagate through multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Vexstar, as for arms, trembled with rage and fear. Insane. They would destroy themselves as well. Perhaps that is their intention. Warhead Gem. Intelligence reports suggest humans have a concept called mutually assured destruction that they consider tactically viable. Aboard the Harbinger's Dawn, Admiral Valdres felt the deck plates vibrating beneath her feet as exotic energies built toward critical thresholds. The bridge lights flickered as power systems struggled to contain forces that belonged in the hearts of stars. 60 seconds to cascade initiation. Dr. Vasquez announced. All non-essential personnel should evacuate to the emergency pods. Negative, Valdres replied firmly. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. All hands remain at stations. Commander Korath gripped his console as another power surge sent tremors through the ship. Admiral, perhaps we should consider the aliens surrender. They don't surrender. Valdres cut him off. Look at their formation. They're not retreating. They're preparing for a final assault. She was right. The Corvani fleet had abandoned their containment strategy. It was accelerating directly toward the human flagship, weapons charging for a desperate all-or-nothing attack. If they could cripple the Harbinger's Dawn before the cascade sequence completed, they might survive the encounter. Incoming transmission from the alien fleet. Lieutenant Thorne reported. Vexstar's image appeared on the main screen. His features twisted with fury. You mad creatures, do you understand what you're threatening? That weapon will tear around in reality itself. That's the idea. Valdres replied calmly. You wanted to see human military doctrine. Warhead Gem. Here it is. If we can't win, we make sure nobody wins. Your own world will be destroyed. Earth has deep bunkers. Our children will survive in underground cities until the dimensional fractures heal. Can you say the same about your homeworld? The transmission cut to static as Vexstar processed the implications. The humans weren't just threatening local destruction. The cascade effect would propagate along the dimensional pathways that connected all points in space. The Corvani homeworld, thousands of light years away, would feel the weapon's touch as surely as the ships in Sol system. 30 seconds to cascade. Vasquez called out. Power levels are approaching critical thresholds. If we don't initiate soon, the containment systems will fail and the cascade will begin spontaneously. The Corvani fleet struck with everything they had. Thousands of energy beams converged on the Harbinger's Dawn, overwhelming the distortion field and hammering directly against the hull. Armor plating vaporized under the assault, and secondary explosions bloomed along the ship's flanks. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Korath reported, we're losing atmospheric integrity. Cascade initiation in 15 seconds, Vasquez announced, her voice tight with concentration. 10, 9, 8. Valdres watched the tactical display as Corvani ships closed to ramming distance, their commanders choosing to die in glorious battle rather than witness their empire's destruction. She found herself respecting their courage even as she prepared to erase them from existence. 3, 2, 1. The universe screamed. Reality fractured around the Harbinger's Dawn as compressed spacetime exploded outward in an expanding sphere of pure annihilation. Corvani ships caught in the initial wavefront didn't just die, they were retroactively prevented from ever having existed. Their matter and energy scattered across probability spectrums that had no names. But the cascade effect was spreading, propagating through subspace channels toward distant star systems. Somewhere in the galactic core, Corvani sensor stations were registering impossible readings as the weapon's influence raced toward their homeworld at speeds that made light seem sluggish. Vexstar watched his fleet dissolve into quantum foam and realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in the galaxy's history, a species that would rather destroy reality than accept subjugation. The expanding cascade reached the edge of Sol system and began to slow, its energy dispersing across cosmic distances. But the message was clear: humanity possessed weapons that could threaten any target anywhere in the galaxy, regardless of distance or defenses. Cascade complete, Vasquez reported, her voice barely audible over the klaxons. Dimensional fractures are stabilizing. The effect is contained within local space. Valdres looked at the tactical display, now showing vast empty regions where the Corvani fleet had been moments before. Of the 10,000 ships that had threatened Earth, fewer than 300 remained, scattered and running for the edge of the system. But her victory felt hollow. The Harbinger's dawn was dying around her, its hull cracked and atmosphere bleeding into space. Worse, she could see secondary cascade effects beginning to manifest, reality tears that would take decades to heal completely. Humanity had won its first battle against galactic civilization. The question was whether anyone would survive long enough to fight the second. The Harbinger's dawn limped through the debris field that had once been the Corvani vanguard, her hull bleeding atmosphere and exotic radiation in equal measure. Admiral Valdres stood on a bridge lit only by emergency power, watching her crew work frantically to keep their dying ship operational long enough to matter. Damage report, she commanded, though the answer was written in the sparks cascading from overhead conduits and the acrid smell of burning circuitry. Commander Cora's scarred face was grim in the red emergency lighting. Main power at 12% and falling. Life support is failing on 7 decks. The Void engine is offline. Cascade backwash damaged the quantum containment systems. He paused. We have maybe 6 hours of life support remaining. Through the shattered viewport, they could see the surviving Corvani ships regrouping at the edge of Sol system. 300 vessels from an armada of 10,000. But still more than enough to reduce Earth to molten slag if they chose to make a final attack. They're not running, Lieutenant Thorne observed from her communication station. Sensors show they're waiting. Valdres frowned. In her experience, species that had just witnessed impossible weapons tended toward immediate retreat or desperate vengeance. This calculated pause suggested something else entirely. Her answer came in the form of spatial distortions appearing throughout the outer system. Reality twisted and folded as massive shapes translated from hyperspace reinforcements arriving through Corvani gate technology. But these weren't standard military vessels. Mother of God, Dr. Vasquez breathed. From her engineering station, those are fortress ships, planet killers. The new arrivals dwarfed even the Harbinger's dawn, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to crack continental plates and boil away oceans. More disturbing were the energy signatures. Each fortress ship carried its own reality anchors, devices that would make the space around them immune to cascade weapons. Incoming transmission, Thorne reported. A new figure appeared on the main screen, not Vexstar, but an older Corvani whose carapace bore the intricate scarification of supreme military rank. When he spoke, his translator rendered a voice like grinding stone. I am Fleet Tyrant Kexamor Kethane, Supreme Commander of the Corvani Death Fleet. The amusing demonstration with your cascade weapon has been noted and countered. Observe. The fortress ships began to deploy their reality anchors, creating overlapping fields of stabilized space-time that extended throughout the inner system. Within minutes, the space around Earth itself was locked into normal physics. No exotic weapons would function within the anchored zones. Your clever tricks are finished, humans, Kethane continued. Now you will face the full might of the Corvani Empire, unfiltered by restraint or mercy. The transmission ended and the Death Fleet began its advance, 50 fortress ships supported by the survivors of the original armada, moving with the methodical precision of executioners. We need options, Valdres said quietly. Engineering. What's the status on conventional weapons? Kinetic batteries are operational, Vasquez replied. Plasma systems are down, but we could restore basic missile functionality in maybe 4 hours. We don't have 4 hours, Korath observed. At their current approach speed, they'll reach weapons range in 90 minutes, Valdres closed her eyes, thinking furiously. The Cascade weapon had been humanity's ace in the hole, their guarantee that any enemy would pay an unacceptable price for victory. With that option neutralized, they were back to fighting a conventional battle against overwhelming odds. But humans had been fighting overwhelming odds since they first picked up sharpened sticks. New plan, she announced. We're going to ram the lead fortress ship. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing life support systems. Admiral, Cora said carefully, our void engine is offline. We barely have maneuvering thrusters. I'm not talking about ramming with the ship. Valdres replied, I'm talking about ramming with the engine itself. Dr. Vasquez, can you rig the void engine for manual detonation? The scientist's face went pale. Admiral, without containment protocols, the engine will create an uncontrolled singularity. The gravitational effects alone will tear the fortress ship apart. From the inside, Valdres finished. How long do you need? 20 minutes to bypass the safety systems. But Admiral, someone would have to manually trigger the detonation. The radiation levels. I'll do it. Valdres said simply, no. The voice came from behind her. As she turned to see Master Chief Damon Reeves, the ship's senior non-commissioned officer. Half his chest was wrapped in bandages from the earlier battle, but his eyes burned with determination. You're needed on the bridge, ma'am. This is an enlisted man's job. Before Valdres could respond, other voices joined in. I'll go with him, said Corporal Nina Vash from the Marine Detachment. And me, added Petty Officer Rex Donnelly from Damage Control. Within minutes, 24 crew members had volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission. They knew the odds knew that manually detonating an uncontrolled singularity would tear their atoms apart before their nervous systems could register the pain. They volunteered anyway. Belay that, Valdres said firmly, we're all in this together. The entire crew stays with the ship. Ma'am, with respect, Reeves replied, some of us didn't sign up to die in our bunks. We signed up to die making the bastards pay for it. The approach had been rehearsed in simulations emergency protocols for the unthinkable scenario, where the void engine became a weapon of last resort. The Harbinger's Dawn would accelerate on minimal power toward the lead fortress ship, using debris, fields, and sensor shadows to mask their approach. When they reached optimal range, the volunteers would manually destabilize the engine core while the rest of the crew evacuated in emergency pods. It was desperate, brutal, and had perhaps a 10% chance of success. It was also the most human plan anyone could devise. All hands, this is Admiral Valdres, she announced over the ship's communication system. In 18 minutes, we're going to fly this bucket of bolts straight down the throat of the biggest, meanest ship in their fleet. Some of you won't be coming home, but your children will remember that when extinction came calling, humanity didn't go quietly into the night. She paused, watching her crew prepare for what might be their final battle. We showed them our science. Now let's show them our will. The Harbinger's Dawn turned toward the fortress fleet, her engines coughing to life one last time. The fortress ship World Eater measured 12 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with enough firepower to sterilize entire continents. Fleet Tyrant Kethane stood on its command bridge, watching the crippled human vessel limp toward his battle group. With what appeared to be suicidal determination, curious, he clicked to his tactical coordinator. Their ship is clearly dying, yet they continue to approach. Are humans truly this insane? Intelligence suggests they prefer death to subjugation, the coordinator replied. Perhaps they seek to ram us in some desperate final gesture. Kethane's compound eyes glittered with amusement. That we shall grant them a warrior's death. All ships, concentrate fire on the human vessel. Destroy it before it can close to ramming distance. The Death Fleet responded with overwhelming firepower. Energy beams capable of cracking planetary crusts lanced through space, while kinetic projectiles the size of buildings raced toward the Harbinger's Dawn. The human ship's damaged shields flickered and failed under the assault, and her hull began to disintegrate under the incredible punishment. On the bridge of the dying flagship, Admiral Valdres felt the deck heaving beneath her feet as secondary explosions ripped through the ship's interior. The main viewers showed the fortress ship growing larger, its weapons ports glowing like the eyes of some cosmic predator. Hull integrity down to 15%, Commander Korath reported, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. We're losing structural cohesion. Distance to target, Valdres asked, gripping her command chair as another impact sent shockwaves through the superstructure. 40,000 kilometers and closing, came the reply. We need 30,000 for optimal detonation range. In engineering, Master Chief Reeves and his volunteer team worked frantically to prepare the Void engine for manual detonation. The space around the massive reactor core had become a hellscape of radiation and exotic energy discharges, forcing the team to work in shifts of 30 seconds before the exposure became lethal. Safeties are offline, Reeves reported over the comm system, his voice distorted by the breathing apparatus. That was all that kept him alive in the contaminated engineering bay. Beginning final sequence now. The volunteers knew they had perhaps 2 minutes before the radiation killed them outright. They used every second, their hands steady despite knowing they were already dead. Their training overriding the animal terror that should have sent them fleeing. Corporal Vash collapsed first, her nervous system overwhelmed by gamma radiation. Petty Officer Donnelly lasted 30 seconds longer before his organs began to liquefy. One by one, the volunteers fell at their posts, but their sacrifice bought precious time for Reeves to complete the final calibrations. 35,000 kilometers, Korath reported. We're not going to make optimal range. Close enough, Valdris replied grimly. She opened a channel to engineering, Chief Reeves. Initiate detonation on my mark. Acknowledged, Admiral, came the reply. The Reeves' voice was barely recognizable through the static and his own physiological distress. Standing by, the Corvani Fortress ship loomed before them now, its massive bulk filling the forward screens. Point defense weapons tracked the incoming human vessel, while emergency force fields activated to minimize ramming damage. Fleet Tyrant Cathane prepared to watch humanity's final gesture of defiance. 30,000 kilometers. Korath announced. Execute. Valdris commanded Dot in engineering. Master Chief Reeves' body already failing from massive radiation exposure reached for the manual detonation controls. His vision was failing, his hands trembling uncontrollably, but 20 years of naval service guided his movements. He found the activation lever and pulled. The Void engine didn't just explode, it imploded, collapsed, and then exploded again in a cascade of gravitational catastrophe that rewrote the fundamental constants of local space. The Harbinger's Dawn vanished in an expanding sphere of twisted space-time, taking her crew of 800 souls with her, but their sacrifice achieved its goal. The uncontrolled singularity that had been the ship's drive system struck the World Eater at relativistic speeds, punching through 12 kilometers of advanced armor plating before detonating in the fortress. Ship's core, Fleet Tyrant Cathane had perhaps a microsecond to process what was happening before gravitational forces strong enough to bend light toward his command apart from the inside. The World Eater folded in on itself like origami made of matter and energy. Its death screen transmitted through subspace frequencies that reached every ship in the system. The gravitational shockwave expanded outward, catching to more fortress ships in its embrace. These vessels, built to survive the collapse of solar systems, crumpled like paper boats in a hurricane. Secondary explosions bloomed throughout the Death Fleet as debris moving at significant fractions of light speed tore through their formations. When the chaos finally cleared, the Corvani had lost 4 fortress ships and 37 support vessels. Nearly 60,000 alien lives had been extinguished in the space of 12 seconds, victims of humanity's willingness to transform their own deaths into weapons. But the Death Fleet still numbered over 200 ships, and their target remained unchanged. Earth hung defenseless in space, her population huddled in underground shelters, waiting to learn if their defender's sacrifice had bought them survival, or merely a more honorable death. Fleet Tyrant Cathane, his consciousness backed up in quantum storage and transferred to a new body, stared at the expanding debris field where the human flagship had died. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something approaching respect for an enemy species. These humans fought like cornered predators, turning every loss into a weapon and every defeat into a small victory. They were magnificent in their brutality, terrifying in their refusal to accept the inevitable, which made it all the more necessary to exterminate them completely. Resume course for the 3rd planet, he ordered his surviving fleet. Prepare orbital bombardment systems. We will make their homeworld a monument to the folly of resisting the Corvani Empire. The Death Fleet continued its inexorable advance toward Earth, but something had changed in the tactical equations. Humanity had just demonstrated that they could hurt their enemies badly enough to matter. The question was whether they had any more surprises left to deploy. Earth's orbital defense platforms had been designed to repel conventional invasions. not the systematic annihilation that the Corvani Death Fleet now brought to bear. One by one, the weapon satellites died under concentrated fire from the fortress ships, their brief flares of destruction visible to the billions of humans watching from underground bunkers. Admiral Helena Vasquez, younger sister of the Harbingers, Dawn's chief engineer, stood in the command center of Luna Base, humanity's last military installation. The moon's defensive systems were more robust than Earth's orbital platforms, but they wouldn't last long against the firepower now arrayed against them. Status report, she demanded, though the tactical displays told the story with brutal clarity. Orbital defense grid is down to 12% operational capacity, reported Colonel Marcus Webb, his artificial arm gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Earth-based particle cannons are still firing, but their effective range is limited. We can maybe delay the bombardment by 6 hours. 6 hours. Vasquez closed her eyes, thinking of the families packed into emergency shelters beneath every major city on Earth. 6 hours was nothing, barely enough time for final prayers and last messages to loved ones. What about the contingency protocol? She asked quietly. Webb's expression darkened. Ma'am, contingency it's never been tested on this scale. The Psychological Warfare Division created it as a theoretical deterrent, not an actual weapon system. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old, Colonel. We upload the complete historical database of human warfare into the Corvani communication networks. Every battle, every atrocity, every tactical innovation from the last 10,000 years. The idea is to make them understand exactly what kind of species they're trying to exterminate. Vasquez frowned. Psychological warfare against a species that's conquered 17 civilizations, not psychological, educational. The Corvani think they understand human military doctrine based on one engagement. Contingency shows them everything from cave paintings of mammoth hunts to the nuclear fire of World War III. It demonstrates that humans have been perfecting the art of warfare since before they discovered agriculture. On the main screen, the Death Fleet settled into bombardment formation above Earth's Terminator line. Massive energy projectors began charging, preparing to turn the planet's surface into molten glass. Fleet tyrant Kethane intended to make humanity's extinction a spectacle that would discourage resistance throughout the galaxy. Upload contingency, Vasquez ordered. If we're going to die, let's make sure they understand what they're killing. The data upload began immediately, flooding Corvani communication systems with the complete record of human conflict, historical documents, tactical analyses, first-hand accounts of battles fought across 10 millennia of recorded history. The aliens' translation matrices struggled to process the sheer volume of information, but certain patterns began to emerge. Humans, it appeared, had never fought a war they considered impossible to win. At Marathon, 300 Spartans had held off an army of hundreds of thousands. At Stalingrad, Soviet defenders had fought German invaders room by room, building by building. For months, during the siege of Terra Nova, colonial marines had held their position for 3 years, against impossible odds, ultimately forcing a much larger enemy force to withdraw. But it was the smaller conflicts that truly disturbed the Corvani analysts. Accounts of guerrilla campaigns that lasted decades, of resistance movements that continued fighting long after their causes seemed hopeless, of individuals who had brought down entire military organizations through patience, cunning, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Fleet tyrant Kethane reviewed the data downloads with growing unease. His species had conquered other civilizations through overwhelming technological superiority, but those victories had been achieved against enemies who ultimately recognized the futility of resistance. Humans appeared to consider futility merely another tactical challenge to overcome. More disturbing were the human innovations in asymmetric warfare, chemical weapons, biological agents, nuclear devices deployed by individuals, cyber warfare that could cripple entire technological civilizations. The historical record revealed a species that had weaponized everything from disease to information itself. Analysis complete. Fleet tyrant, his intelligence coordinator, reported. Human military doctrine appears to be based on the concept of total war, the mobilization of entire civilizations for combat purposes. They do not distinguish between military and civilian targets when their survival is threatened, meaning that if we proceed with planetary bombardment, we will not just be destroying their homeworld. We will be creating approximately 3 billion martyrs. whose deaths will inspire human resistance movements for centuries. Kethane stared at the tactical display, suddenly seeing the human defenders in a new light. The Harbinger's Dawn hadn't been humanity's primary military asset. It had been a demonstration, a message sent to the galaxy that humans would rather die than submit, and that their deaths would exact a terrible price from their killers. Fleet Tyrant, his communications officer, announced, "We're receiving a transmission from the human moon base." Admiral Vasquez appeared on the main screen, her expression calm despite the hopelessness of her situation. Behind her, the Lunar Command Center bustled with activity as her staff prepared for humanity's final stand. "Fleet Tyrant Kethane," she said without preamble, "I assume you've had time to review our gift. Your historical records." "Yes," Kethane replied carefully. "Most illuminating. Then you understand what you're facing. We're not the first species you've conquered, but we're going to be the last. Because when you finish glassing Earth, there will still be humans out there, on Mars, in the asteroid belt, aboard colony ships that won't reach their destinations for decades, and every single one of them will know that you turned their homeworld into a grave." Vasquez paused, letting the implications sink in. "You've read our history, Kethane. You know what we do to enemies who threaten our families. We don't just fight them, we erase them. Your empire spans 1,000 worlds, but we only need to reach one of them to begin your extinction." The transmission ended, and Kethane found himself staring at a blank screen, processing the human's words. The historical records had shown him a species that treated warfare as both art and science. But Admiral Vasquez had just revealed something more disturbing: humans who considered genocide a viable military strategy. "Sir," his tactical coordinator interrupted his thoughts. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the outer system. Multiple contacts translating from hyperspace." Kethane turned to the display, expecting to see human reinforcements arriving to die alongside their homeworld. Instead, he saw something that made his compound eyes dilate with shock. Ships were emerging from hyperspace throughout Sol System, not human vessels, but the distinctive signatures of a dozen different species: Vargani battlecruisers, Etherian dreadnoughts, Zenthari carrier groups, even the bioships of the reclusive Morphic Collective. "What is this?" Kethane demanded. His answer came in the form of a new transmission, this one from the bridge of a Vargani flagship. The image showed Commander Zathara Mindweaver, whose species had been the Corvani Empire's most recent conquest before humanity. "Fleet Tyrant Kethane," the alien commander said, her voice carrying harmonics of barely controlled rage. "We have reviewed the human historical records that they broadcast throughout the galaxy. We find their approach to warfare instructive. More ships continue to emerge from hyperspace vessels, from species that the Corvani had subjugated, enslaved, or driven to the brink of extinction. They had come not to save humanity, but to learn from them. The humans have shown us something we had forgotten," Zathara continued, "that there are fates worse than death, and prices too high to pay for survival. Today, we choose to remember what we once were." The combined fleet began to accelerate toward the Death Fleet, their weapons charging. Kethane found himself facing not just humanity's last stand, but a galactic uprising inspired by human military philosophy. "All ships," he commanded his fleet, "prepare for battle. Show these rebellious species why the Corvani Empire rules the galaxy." But even as he gave the order, Kethane knew that something fundamental had changed. Humanity had just taught the galaxy as oppressed species that empires could be resisted, that even overwhelming force could be challenged. The humans had already won their real victory not through their weapons, but through their example. Now they just had to survive long enough to see it realized. The Battle of Sol System lasted 14 hours and redefined galactic warfare forever. The combined rebel fleet struck the Corvani Death Fleet in waves, each species employing tactics learned from humanity's historical database. Vargani's ships used Fabian strategies, harassing the enemy with hit-and-run attacks while avoiding decisive engagement. Etherian dreadnoughts deployed in defensive formations reminiscent of ancient phalanxes, their overlapping shields creating impenetrable walls of energy. Most devastatingly, the Morphic Collective had absorbed humanity's lessons about asymmetric warfare. Their bioships infiltrated the Corvani formation by mimicking asteroid debris, then suddenly revealed themselves inside the enemy's defensive perimeter, striking at command vessels with surgical precision. Fleet Tyrant Kethane watched his carefully ordered battle lines dissolve into chaos as the rebels implemented human tactical doctrines. with alien innovations. His fortress ships, designed to overwhelm enemies through superior firepower, found themselves outmaneuvered by forces that refused to fight conventionally. Status report. He demanded as his flagship shuddered under concentrated fire from 3 different directions. We've lost 60% of our combat effectiveness, his tactical coordinator reported. The rebels are using hit-and-run tactics that prevent us from bringing our full firepower to bear. They've also deployed some kind of quantum virus that's interfering with our targeting systems. That last innovation was purely human, a gift from Earth's cyber warfare specialists, who had managed to infiltrate Corvani computer networks during the data upload. The virus didn't destroy alien systems, but rather introduced random errors that made precision targeting impossible. On Luna base, Admiral Vasquez watched the battle unfold with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Humanity's desperate gambit had worked beyond her wildest expectations, turning their last stand into the catalyst for a galactic revolution. "Man," Colonel Webb reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Vargani flagship. They're requesting permission to land ground forces on Luna." "Granted," Vasquez replied immediately. "Tell them they're welcome to join the fight." Within hours, Luna base had become the operational headquarters for the largest military alliance in galactic history. Representatives from dozens of species coordinated their attacks against the Corvani Empire, sharing intelligence and resources with the efficiency of veteran campaigners. The turning point came when the Zen-3 deployed, their ultimate weapon, a device that could destabilize the quantum foundations of reality anchors. Suddenly, the Corvani's defenses against exotic weapons became liabilities, creating feedback loops that tore their own ships apart from within. Fleet Tyrant Kethane realized he was witnessing the end of his empire. The rebels had learned not just human tactics, but human psychology, the understanding that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. "All ships," he commanded, "prepare for strategic withdrawal." But the rebels had anticipated this moment. Human military doctrine emphasized the importance of pursuit, of never allowing a defeated enemy to regroup and return stronger. The combined fleet followed the retreating Corvani forces, harrying them across multiple star systems, turning withdrawal into rout. The war that followed lasted 3 years and reshaped the galaxy's political structure. The Corvani Empire, which had dominated galactic civilization for centuries, collapsed as species after species rose in rebellion. Their technology was captured, their worlds liberated, their very identity as conquerors erased from history. Humanity played a crucial role in the final victory, but not through their weapons. Instead, they served as teachers and advisors, sharing 10,000 years of military experience with species that have forgotten how to fight effectively. Human military academies were established on dozens of worlds, staffed by veterans who had learned that the greatest weapon wasn't technology, it was the refusal to accept defeat. Admiral Kira Valdris, her consciousness recovered from the Harbinger's Dawn's quantum backup system, stood on the observation deck of the new Terran embassy on the former Corvani Homeworld. The planet had been renamed Haven and now served as the capital of the Galactic Liberation Alliance. "Penny, for your thoughts?" asked Admiral Helena Vasquez, joining her sister officer at the viewport. "I'm thinking about the crew of the Harbinger's Dawn." Valdris replied, "They died believing they were fighting humanity's last battle. Instead, they started a revolution that freed half the galaxy." Master Chief Reeves would have appreciated the irony. Vasquez observed, "He always said that humans were too stubborn to stay dead when there was still work to do." Outside the viewport, the lights of a rebuilt civilization twinkled in the darkness. Former slave species now walked freely among their former masters, building a new society based on cooperation rather than conquest. Children who had never known freedom played in parks that had once been military installations. It was a human victory, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior technology or overwhelming force. Instead, they had demonstrated that the will to resist could be more powerful than any weapon. The Corvani Empire had fallen not because they were outgunned, but because they were outthought by a species that had never learned to accept the unacceptable. In the end, Earth's flagship had emerged from the darkness not as a harbinger of humanity's destruction, but as the herald of galactic liberation. The Corvani Homeworld hadn't disappeared in seconds. It had been transformed over years into something better, something worthy of the sacrifice that had made it possible. And in the halls of the new Galactic Senate, when representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered to debate the future, they began each session with a moment of silence for the 800 souls Who had died aboard the Harbinger's Dawn? The humans who had taught the galaxy that freedom was worth any price, and that even empires could be humbled by those who refused to kneel. The age of human dominance had not begun with conquest, but with the simple act of showing others that tyranny was not inevitable. Sometimes, the greatest victory was simply the courage to fight when fighting seemed impossible, and in that, humanity had achieved something truly remarkable. They had made the galaxy more human. Without firing a single shot in anger, the war was over. The real victory was just beginning.